Welcome to the tutorial Positioning the Elements in 3D Space for Animate Pro. So as I mentioned in the previous tutorial, I created my flattened pieces that I'm going to rotate for my 3D dojo by looking at the original version of our dojo, which is 2D, and by creating first the ceiling, which is this piece right here, and then the floor, and then creating the walls and all the other elements in relationship to the size of the floor. So by looking at our dojo image, I was able to guess the relative heights of the walls as well as the relative heights of the balcony front here, the mezzanine balcony front, etc., just to have a rough version of the pieces that we need for the 3D dojo. But before I did all this, I actually roughed out the pieces on a piece of paper beside me. I had to think about what this would look like in 3D, and I did sort of a floor plan layout that you might see an architect do, trying to decide how many pieces I needed, what size they would be, what pieces would be repeated so I wouldn't have to create them more than once, such as the beam. So we can see here that it looks like there's only a single piece for the beam, but actually all four pieces are stacked one on top of the other. And this is an element that will be repeated throughout the 3D dojo, so of course I only created it once. So those things you think about, you lay out and you draw out. So I actually drew out this piece of the shoji, which let me show you what it looks like. You actually had to cut out the wall for the doorway and the balcony. So like that. So I had to think about what that would look like because eventually I'll probably put the balcony out there as well as all the elements for the background. So this hole has to actually exist in this wall. So let's bring all those elements back. So in general, what we're about to create is really not that bad. It's pretty simple, all things considered. It's like a three-sided room with an open face. There are a few extra features and details, such as the mezzanine balcony and the beams, but it's not so complex. If you take a look at the user guide, there's actually a castle that was built that's quite extensive. It looks like a fortress, and it has various towers and wings and sections. It's quite large, so something like that. Although it's all vector based and although your file size is quite small for that, is really hard on your RAM and your video card because it needs to render as you're rotating in 3D or it's sort of running the scene. That part of it is difficult, usually for your computer to handle. So in instances like that, it's actually good to show and hide only the sections that you need. So to hide the sections you don't need and to show the sections that you do need when you set up your camera and you set up your scene and you're running your actual scene. So the last thing I'd like to do before we start positioning our elements is to set up our workspace. So for positioning our elements, you actually need quite a few of the views. You're going to use the camera view, the top view, the side view, the perspective view, the layer properties panel, which we already have out, and then also I remember using the drawing view at the library at least once, and of course the timeline view, which we also have out. So let's bring out the top view. And I'm going to grab the tab here that says top and drag it to a position that's between this camera perspective window and then our layer properties panel right here. And then maybe under the top view I'll also bring up the side view. But sometimes I rearrange them as I'm working. I might all of a sudden realize that I need to see the top view and the side view at the same time, so then I'll open the top view over here, or have the camera view here and then the perspective view, and then bring the drawing view up here. So I work as I need so that I can see everything I need at the same time. If you happen to have the luxury of two monitors, it's even better. You can spread yourself out even a bit better than this. This is sort of tight quarters, but of course I can only record on one screen, so I'm going to show it to you like this. So let's start by going into the perspective view and selecting the rotate tool. And you can see that our ceiling is already selected. We can see that here it says ceiling in the layer properties. for this layer. And so what I want to do is rotate the ceiling 90 degrees along this axis here that's defined by this red circle. And I believe that's the x-axis. So I'm going to go to the rotation section, to the x-axis, and type in 90. And there you go. So it's rotated exactly 90 degrees. And then what I can do is I can pull it upwards by going to the Translate tool, clicking on the pink arrow here that's already selected, so it's already been selected, and I can pull upwards. And you can see the values in the y-axis increasing as I pull towards north. And right now I'm just moving it somewhere arbitrary. We don't know yet how high it's going to be. So next I'm going to select the floor and do the same thing. I'm going to rotate. I don't necessarily need to click on the rotate button to enter a value here. I sort of just did that habitually. So same thing, we're going to go 90 and hit enter. And actually we could probably do that for the, oops, see I accidentally rotated it a little bit in the wrong direction, for the mezzanine floor as well. So same thing, rotation, x-axis, 90. And we know that because all three of these planes, the ceiling, the floor, and the mezzanine, so let's take the floor actually, and bring it downwards. So these three levels will be parallel, but they'll be spread out at a distance similar to this. I actually think this might be too far. It looks like it's below the grid. So maybe something like that. And you can also see it here in the side view. And before we enabled the 3D option for these layers, we were only able to see them in the side view as vertical lines and in the top view as horizontal lines. But now, as you can see, we can see what the ceiling would look like if we were looking from a bird's eye view. And we can see a full version of it in color as it would be seen in the perspective view as we're filming or through the camera view. So you'll see as we flip the dojo walls, the same thing for the side view. We'll be able to see them clearly in full detail as if we're looking at the side of the dojo. On that note, let's actually start flipping these walls as well. So shoji _2 is this one over here that's been highlighted in pink. So this time not only do we have to rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis, we also have to flip it inwards. So let's do our first 90-degree flip. Oh, and we have to make sure that we're on Euler angles. There we go. And now we want to flip it inwards. So along this green circle, which I believe is the z-axis. So let's try that. And because it's rotating around this pivot point and not around its center, it's been lowered into the what looks like the ground. It's been flipped over and around this pivot point. So now we have to do some adjusting for the XY position. So I'm going to use the Translate tool and highlight this red arrow and pull upwards. And then highlight the blue and pull this way. So you can do it there like that, or you can do it through the side and top view, which is actually what I recommend. So we're going to do it that way for the next side. And as you can see, the values have changed here again. Our wall has been moved west and north of its rotated position. And one other thing is we have to make sure that our wall and our floor, so where two planes meet, actually intersect. And that's because even if you have them microscopically close together, you'll always be able to see a white line, a white space that appears between two planes. So you actually have to have a small overlap within the corners. So let's just do our second shoji very quickly. Euler angles, 90 here, and 90 here as well. We're going to this time go to the side view here, grab the red arrow and pull downwards, and make them look relatively close. You can always zoom in do what you need to do, and then go to the top view and pull on the blue arrow and pull it this way. And one thing you might notice, which I just noticed as well, is that this screen is actually flipped upside down. This area with the narrower divisions is now on the bottom where it should be at the top, like this. And if we go to the side view, you'll see, because these happen to be semi-transparent, it's actually easy to see through them, and you shouldn't be able to see any pattern through if they're sitting one on top of the other. So this shoji definitely needs to be rotated. So to do this, let's select our shoji again. And what we're going to have to do is flip the x-axis not 90 degrees, but I believe it's 270 degrees. So we flipped it once this way, but what we really meant to do is put another 180 on top of that. So if you're good at math, you'll know that you'll always go 90 degrees, 180, 270, or 360, and that's going in 90-degree increments. So let's change that. So maybe I was wrong. It was probably on the z-axis. I probably got them confused, and if we back out, yeah, that's it. So now it's facing the right way, but once again it's been flipped upwards, so we're going to have to pull it down. Like that. Anyway, something like that, we can always adjust it a bit more later. And the reason that this part sticks out a little bit is because when I copied them, I dragged the transparent part down a little bit further on one screen and not on the other, so that's why it looks like they're not even. It's best to make sure that they're similar so that you can line them up perfectly. But I'm just using the black dividers to make that those alignments. And then one thing that we're also looking for is the floor, because it's here right now, which is good because you can see there's a small intersection. So we see the bottom of this shoji, the white part and some of the black lines intersect with the floor, as does the other side because it happens to be longer. So that's exactly what we're looking for, that intersection. And if we zoom in here, in the perspective view, you see the same thing. There's definitely an overlap. The pink comes out past the shoji, and the shoji cuts through the floor. And you can always use Shift M to bring everything back to the 0, point in terms of the perspective. Okay, so I'm going to grab the mezzanine floor, which I also need to flip 180 degrees the other way, and I'm going to bring it down to the top of the second set of dividers. That was what I was using as my marker when I was creating this screen. If we look at the original image for a moment, you'll see that the balcony seems to come to the end of a set of dividers that, if we zoom in, actually look square. They look like these rectangular sections have been divided through the middle. So it looks like these are square and these are rectangular sections, and it seems like there's only 1, 2, 3, 3 rows here of this kind of condensed division, and that's where I knew the balcony, or this mezzanine balcony floor, should start, and so that was my indicator. So now if we go back to the perspective view and we look at our dojo, that's where I'm looking to bring this floor down to. So let's select it here in the timeline view. I'll bring it down here to the top of those divisions, and I also, like I said, wanted to flip the floor over again, so I believe it's 270 as well, or am I making the same mistake? Oh no, okay, so it's good this time. But I do have to pull it forward so that it sits in the right place, like that. I'm not going to worry about the ceiling for now. I'll bring it downwards later. Let's put the last shoji in place and then start putting on the covers of the balconies. So that's our first shoji here. It's actually in the perfect position in terms of rotation, so we just need to bring it downwards. And we also need to bring it across. So something like that. Like I said, there needs to be a small overlap, and then down. So something like that. Later on, if you want to get in really close, I started trying to line up these black lines with these black lines. That's what you're really looking for if you want a perfect alignment on both sides. And I wanted as little of that white overlap as possible, so I think I tried to get a really tiny overlap, but something that was almost invisible. Okay, and then lastly, let's bring these, I think I labeled them mezzanine thatch, just because of the material and that they belong to the mezzanine. So once again, this one's really easy. We grab the arrow, we bring it down. I don't know if you can see where it is in this view. It's kind of difficult to see. I believe it's this thing right here. Oh, right, and you can't see what's going on because the ceiling is acting like a cap. So you can always hide what you don't need. Always do that. When I've been adjusting, I always, if I'm from the side view, I often made this part of the wall disappear because I needed to see what was inside. I often got rid of the ceiling because I needed to see what was happening from the top. So wherever you are, don't feel shy to hide what you don't need so that you can look into your three-dimensional object more clearly. So this balcony thatch obviously has to align itself with the edge of the mezzanine floor, so something like that. And once again, we're going to have to overlap at the corners. So I'm going to grab the next one, do some rotating with our angles. I think this time it needs to be rotated on the Y. No, for sure there's a 90 there. And then maybe there's just a 90 there. These ones, I don't think it really matters if they're flipped upside down. I'm pretty sure there's the same amount of space around these gray bindings, both the top and the bottom, so it doesn't matter which one is up and which one is down. So for me, I'd rather have the back perfect, and if there's like little overhangs or lips over here, there's a space over here, to me that doesn't matter as much because any of the filming I'm going to be doing is probably going to be back towards this back wall and less towards these edges, these rough edges where the building doesn't exist. So for me, this is my base point. And of course, if we go to the top, we'd like to bring it to this side. And we want to align it with the edge of the mezzanine floor. And this is a bit long as well. So as I mentioned, this is quite long. We can see that from the top, and if we rotate our view here, okay, so it sticks out into the balcony, but that's not really a big deal. However, if you do want to shorten it, I'll just use this as an example quickly. You can go to the scale area here and have them separate instead of being locked, and you can decide that along the z-axis, because this is where it's receding into space, you want it to be, say, half the length that it is. Okay, sorry, so it was along the y-axis, so I'm messing up my axes a little bit here, but you can see, so I made it exactly half. It was a bit long, so really what it would be is probably something like 0.9, because it was almost perfect, or maybe even something more precise, something like that. So there's less of an overlap. I actually didn't really care. It's because you won't see the inside of that balcony, you can leave it to its full length. But like I said, you can do the adjusting here as long as what you're doing can be stretched and scaled. The moment that that looks weird, for example, with the shoji wall, the moment you expand the wall and make it longer, what it's going to do is pull these rectangular divisions or squash them, which makes them look not the same proportion as all the other ones, which makes them look weird. So this is something that you cannot scale with in this section, and these are the types of objects that I would bring back to the drawing view and adjust there. Okay, so let's finish up the last little bit of the dojo. Okay, so now let's take a look at the beams, which we have right here. I'm going to rotate them and then put them together so at least there's one single post that has the four panels in the correct position. And then I'll show you the two different methods that you can use for dragging around a group and copying and pasting a group and rotating a group of objects that have been rotated onto different planes and that exist on different layers. Okay, so to be able to translate this entire group together, so let me just check in the side view if they're at the right height. If I didn't accidentally move them so that one is longer than the other. Yeah, they look to be okay, I think. Yeah, okay, they look pretty good. Okay, so to move this group together, you can either attach all the panels to the same peg, or you can put all the panels together in a symbol. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both, as always. when you put them in a symbol, the great part is if you make an adjustment, if I suddenly want to make this smaller and I have a post at 8 different locations around the dojo, they'll all simultaneously be shortened. The problem is if I want to have short pieces and longer pieces, then once again they'll all be shortened, so I'd have to make a second symbol, one that's short and one that's long, etc. And the peg in general I find personally easier to use, but I mean it really is just a question of preference. So let me ungroup all of these. And then I'm going to delete the group like that. Actually, a lot of this can also be done in the network view, which is something we're going to get to in one of the tutorials in this video tutorial pack. But for now, I'll just add a peg here, and then I'll attach all these other panels to that peg. And I'll keep it as beam P to be beam peg. And now, because this is attached to a peg, it also works in 3D space, just like the individual panels. And if we look from the top view here, and this is exactly why you have to do it in the network view. It's because it's not connected, so I already see what my problem is here. Let's go to the network and take a look at what's going on. So my dojo is in a group. Actually, it's the tutorial dojo, and it seems to be, oh no, it has its own composite. Okay, actually even better, what we should do is let's organize everything first. I'm not actually sure that made it any better because now everything's far apart. Okay, so out of the dojo, the tutorial dojo, you notice that there's a blue port that's empty. So I'm going to pull that and add that to the composite. I'm going to go into the dojo just to double check. Also, things are a little crazy in here. I'm guessing this is the new stuff that I added. So there's a composite, our beam peg, and the 4 panels of our beam. And so what was going on is that this plus its composite, which we should consequently make pass through and not bitmap, so that these remain as vector objects as they're being composited, was put into this multi-port out, but then once we went out here, we noticed that this was empty, so then that cable had to be connected to the composite, then to the main composite. Let's also make this pass through. And into the main composite, so that's why we couldn't see it in the network view. So I guess 3D is a little bit complicated, and it prefers you to work in the network view than in the timeline, so that's what was going on there. And now we can see our beam again, so we're happy. So from the top view, our beam is right here. I'm going to select my beam. I have the translation tool selected, and I'm going to click on the blue arrow and drag it across to the corner. And see, that's what happens when you don't click on the arrows. It sort of freeform translates anywhere. Where you really just want it to go in a straight line like this, you should click and pull with the arrow. So I'm going to zoom in to make sure there's a little bit of an overlap even with the beam. Oh, it's not so bad. So it overlaps a little bit with the mezzanine floor. And it looks like it's a bit too high though, so let's go to the side view. Click on the green arrow and pull downwards. And the beam is so long it really does bisect the floor as well as the ceiling, so we're not really worried too much about that. For sure it's going to go through both planes. And if you remember from our dojo reference, there's actually a beam here, 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 horizontally across, and actually there's quite a bit of woodwork within the shoji as well. So I use the same beam for all of those instances. So what I can do now that I have a beam already made is I can actually duplicate this entire group. So I'm going to right click and say duplicate selected layers. And now when I uncollapse this, you'll see that I have a second version of the beam. And if I click on this arrow here, I can pull that version across. And so it's really fast and easy just to make duplicates and pull across, make duplicates and pull across, and keep everything very symmetric. But now I'm going to show you the other way with symbols, which is also an equally acceptable way of creating an object that needs to be grouped and translated as a group. And in fact, it's one of the best ways to use symbols. So let's do that now. So I'm going to actually duplicate these layers. And then I'm going to pull them out of the peg group. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and select all 4 of these layers, and then go to the top and select Edit, Create Symbol. You can also use F8, and if you have the timeline view toolbar up here, it's the one that looks like a Lego brick. That's the same thing as selecting Create Symbol. And so it asked me what I would like to name it, so I'll name it Beam. I think that I already have a beam symbol in the library from having created the finished version of the dojo, so let's make this one Beam 01 and say OK. And then you can just delete these layers actually. And then if we go to the library view, which we have right here conveniently, we have Beam 01 in our symbols library. So I'm going to drag Beam 01 and drop it in my timeline, and there's my beam. And then what I'm going to do is select it with the Translate tool selected, bring it down, bring it across, and then from the top view, and then I can always drag and put another one in my timeline. I might rename it though to Beam 2. And do the same thing. So I'm not really sure why I wasn't looking closely enough, but why it created my beam here in the center. I actually wanted it to create in the same position as it was to start over here, so I'm not really sure why it put it over here. But where you create your symbol originally is where the symbol is going to be placed every time you drop in the timeline. So before I created that symbol, I probably should have moved all those panels over to one corner or something like that, or at the same height as these beams if I wanted them to appear always on the same level or parallel to these beams that have already been created. But it's not really that big a deal. I can still just move them like that and then move them across. like that, and I'll go in and zoom in and make sure it looks good. The other thing that we can do with a group like this is that we can rotate it, and there is a beam that's supposed to come across like that. So let's put one more beam symbol in the timeline view, and I actually named these beam H for beam horizontal, and you'll see that, you'll see beam HS, which is horizontal short, and those are the ones that went in the back. So if you're analyzing the structure of the finished dojo that I created, that's what that H and that S mean. Oh, I think I didn't validate my change. There we go. Okay, so this time we want to rotate it. We have to make it a 3D transform, so it's something you have to make sure you check off. Okay, and it looks like we still have to bring it down a bit. And you can zoom in. And this is the type of object that you can actually make longer or shorter without too many repercussions. Once I make this longer though, these two beams in the center will also become longer. They'll be scaled as well because they're all connected to each other. So, well, they're not connected to each other, they're all from the same drawing. So actually, I think let's actually do a test here. If I scale the symbol, I'm not sure all of them will scale systematically. However, if I scale the drawing inside the symbol, it might make a difference. So let's scale separate. I want to make it longer, so that's the y-axis. Let's do something extreme like doubling it. So doubled it. Oh, but these ones down here did not double because we would have seen the length drop or increase from the top. So in fact, it's really just the drawing that makes a difference, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I undo and I enter my symbol and I go to the drawing view and I decide from the drawing view that I want to increase the length of my symbol, so something extreme like that, you can see already in the side view that these two beams have increased in height, and that's because they are all connected or all linked to the same drawing. Let's undo that twice. So I guess a way around that is to just scale, to make sure I'm at the top, is to just scale the symbol, and then you don't have to worry about things like these two beams being ridiculously long. So once again, if I select the horizontal beam, I can scale it and not worry about everything else scaling around it. So I don't think it needs to be twice as long. It could be like 1.25 times as long. Let's get rid of that scary grid. Okay. Like that. And I actually made sure that I pulled it out a little bit so that you didn't see these lines that cross. So I might pull it out just a bit past the beams. Maybe in the end I made it a bit wider too from the top so that it touched the mezzanine balcony, but that in this image you wouldn't see the cross. Yeah, like I'd rather have the beam come across and you see it cut across this way than have some of these beams cross downwards. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial, positioning the elements in 3D space. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, 3D camera motion.